Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
This video is a sequel to the Sunland video released in April, so please view that one first to understand the background of what's going on in this one. The link is in the description. Hello again. I'm the Whistleblower from Sunland. Over the months of silence, I got to reflecting on the little details I might have left out, and I believe it's time to shed more light on my experiences. Firstly, I want to tell you a bit about myself, since I failed to do so before. I am an engineer, but that's just a broad term to keep my identity safe. Prior to being an engineer, I started as my father's assistant in Sunland, lending a hand under the long shadows of his work. After my father's unfortunate passing due to radiation exposure, I filled his shoes. I didn't meet this fate as an act of duty, but out of youthful naivete. I was enticed by the pay, believing it to be the breakthrough of a lifetime, a path paved with gold that soon turned into a macabre walk of horror. Now, to the gist of things. To those unfamiliar, Sunland is an organization born out of chaos. The surge in unexplained paranormal sightings necessitated a response. An unknown government body in ghostly hush tones fostered Sunland. What they, or we rather, looked into wasn't as simple as spirits haunting old mansions or ghouls under your bed. Advanced concepts such as dimensional breaches and contacting entities from different realms were the crux of our work, and Project Angela was a major part of it. CJS, as I earlier alluded to, is an abbreviation to signify inhabited dimensions. On the other side, FYL is a system to classify the dimensions. I saw some of you were curious about the dimensions we were dealing with. In reality, the term dimensions barely scratches the surface of these realms. These are not empty spaces. The term void would be misleading, but rather filled with inexplicable geometry and landscapes. It's beyond our current understanding of physics or reality. Take it as reality being folded in novel ways in these realms, and the manifestation is too complex to render in our simple three-dimensional understanding. Space-time follows a different set of rules there. As for whether we have proof in terms of pictures or videos, we do conduct visual documentation of our findings. However, due to classification levels and the risk of the information falling into wrong hands, these have never been made accessible to me. Not to mention, mere pictures or videos cannot do justice to the experiences of these realms. I urge anyone reading this to consider the seriousness of this information. The misuse of such power or knowledge could lead to catastrophic outcomes, more than any war has ever seen. I remain committed to expose the truth in its fullness to the best of my abilities, but the safety of innocent lives takes precedence. Actions have consequences, as do the secrets we keep. Bear in mind, Sunland isn't just shady government officials running secret experiments. It was a morass of intrigues, a network of accomplices that spanned from top-tier officials to low-ranking foot soldiers, from scientists to engineers. I was one cog in the giant wheel, burdened with scraps of information as the operation demanded, always kept on a need-to-know basis.
What's the most disturbing realm your group has encountered?
The concept of disturbing when referring to the realms Sunland has encountered is a bit complex. You see, these realms aren't merely alternate backdrops or settings. They are dimensions with entirely different laws of physics and reality, which could unsettle even the most seasoned of our explorers. That being said, if I had to mention one, I'd choose Murasaki FYL-16. I think back on it and shivers run down my spine, even after all these months. Murasaki is contrary to what most would think disturbing. It isn't a hellscape filled with tormented souls or a chaotic dimension where the sky bleeds. Instead, Murasaki is emptiness. Vast, infinite emptiness. A waiting room with no exit, no entrance. Imagine being completely alone, surrounded by a vast expanse of nothingness, void of everything, sound, touch, life itself.
I assume then no people cross these thresholds then. Not physically anyway. You mentioned projection before, I believe, but there was also mention of machines. You also mentioned taking or harvesting materials from these realms, right? How do you take matter from a place that doesn't have the same rules and bring it to ours? Surely these materials go through some dramatic state changes.
We had only managed to send people physically into a handful of dimensions using the machines that were developed at Sunland. These were dimensions where our usual physical laws were not dramatically violated, where the discrepancies between their reality and ours didn't represent an immediate existential threat to the human form. The projections, as you rightly picked up on, represented a less corporeal form of exploration, whereby a consciousness was sent into another realm without the anchoring of a physical body. Harvesting materials was indeed an intriguing part of the work at Sunland. It was made possible because, as different as the laws of physics were in these dimensions, there were still shared elements of consistency that permitted matter to exist. When matter from these dimensions was brought back into ours, it went through a transition that best can be described as variable. Much of it became mundane, effectively turning into ordinary matter due to the more restrictive natural laws of our own universe. But in a few cases, some materials retained irregular properties, making them invaluable for research. Nonetheless, all of this came with huge risks. The process had to be meticulously managed, and the materials delicately handled, in many cases within facilities specifically designed to contain the worst-case scenarios. As ever, my deepest fear is the potential weaponization of these rare properties. In the wrong hands, the devastation conceivable boggles the mind. I hope this clarifies some of your wonderings. Don't hesitate to ask, should you have more questions.
It does clarify some things, thank you. You mentioned some of these materials were being sold. Who is buying them? What sectors? And also, what was the most noteworthy material you encountered?
I'm glad to hear that I could provide some clarity. As for your questions, your first question brings us into a gray area that I myself don't completely understand or have information about. The transactions were always shrouded in multiple layers of confidentiality and anonymity. What I can tell you is that the buyers, to my knowledge, mostly belong to high-value industries like experimental physics research, advanced computational technologies, or high-risk finance. But the specifics are something even I was kept in the dark about. Regarding the most noteworthy material I encountered, a fascinator was quantum N-lattice, or QNL for short. It has a shimmering obsidian appearance, but possesses electromagnetic properties unlike anything we've ever seen here in our own earthly dimensions. Manipulation of these materials allowed us to advance our technologies, particularly in the realm of energy generation and storage. Of course, it also presented an alarming number of challenges that frequently pushed us to the brink of disaster.
I figured the companies and/or interests in these materials might be obscured, but that's still more insight than I expected. It does sound like your fears about weaponization are likely coming to pass, unfortunately. That said, I hope you're doing better than in the last thread. You sounded pretty isolated. Are things better now?
I appreciate your concern. It's a comfort to know that there are strangers in this world who are willing to offer comfort to someone they haven't met. As for my situation, it's not a situation I wish upon anyone. Isolation indeed is both my shield and my prison. The knowledge I carry makes it risky for me to interact with the world in the same way I used to.
Well, that's awful. I'm sorry to hear you're still in isolation, but I'm glad there's some measure of comfort to be had. I don't mean to sound harsh about this, as I'm sure you've had plenty of time to think on it, but why go through this? Was staying there and having the possibility of influencing things on the inside that much worse? Or is there some other plan you have in mind? I suppose you couldn't say either way. Was there some final incident that made you leave, or was it just the fear that this all might be weaponized?
No need for apologies. I understand your perspective, and it is a valid line of questioning. There isn't a day when I don't ask myself the same thing. Truth be told, staying inside was not an option. After what I'd seen and the information I stumbled upon, I knew too much to remain a part of Sunland. The more I probed, the clearer it became that I was placing myself in more than just professional jeopardy. As for a final incident, it was a culmination of gradual terrors that built up to an inflammable resolution. Staying there, I was only contributing to a machine that was gearing up for something much larger and ominous. The weaponization potential was just a part of it. I felt responsible, and I didn't want to bear any complicity. The thought of such power landing in the laps of unscrupulous individuals or organizations was terrifying enough for me to act. Leaving seemed like the only morally upright thing to do. My only regret is that I cannot directly help dismantle Sunland, but making people aware of their machinations certainly feels like a step in the right direction. But you're correct. Even if I did have more intricate plans to halt its operations, I wouldn't be at liberty to divulge them. I know it's not exactly the answer you might have wanted, but I do hope that it adds a bit of understanding to my situation.
Ever encounter entities similar to demons, spirits, dragons, shadow people?
We certainly encountered a range of entities, some benevolent, some indifferent, and some undoubtedly malicious. However, equating them to the familiar concepts of our folklore, such as demons, spirits, dragons, shadow people, etc., would be an oversimplification. Our human archetypes aren't necessarily applicable to these beings steeped in unfamiliar reality.
What do you know about alien governments, if anything?
Intriguing question. When we refer to alien, we often think of extraterrestrial life based on our understanding of life forms and societal structures. However, the truth, from what I've seen, could be far removed from our preconceived ideas. I should make it clear that I am unaware of any extraterrestrial life in our universe, although I don't doubt that many planets are habitable, if not inhabited, at this very moment. The entities in the dimensions that our team managed to explore didn't adhere to any familiar constructs of government, at least in a way we understand it. Government implies hierarchy, order, and regulated systems, but the beings we interacted with, or more accurately observed, appeared not to function according to organized structures in the traditional sense. Communication and understanding were significant hurdles. The concept of thought or communication for these entities was sometimes so radically different from ours that even drawing comparisons was often a futile exercise. That being said, we have speculated forms of collectiveness, symbiosis, or even unity in action among the entities we observed. But whether this equates to a type of government or social order is still only a speculation. So yes, the short answer to your question would unfortunately be very little or almost nothing. Alien societies, if they exist in the sense we understand them, stay an enigma for us, at least in the realms we've reached so far.
Was any form of communication achieved at all? Any kind of exchange, and do you know any details of such an exchange? What about the malevolent ones? How were their intentions determined?
Communication, if we can term it that way, was incredibly challenging. Traditional modes of communication, verbal, non-verbal, proved largely ineffective. Our subject was outfitted with a device that could broadcast a sort of generalized greeting in various forms of communication spectrum, from sound frequency variations to light signals and more. However, the responses we received, if any, were very hard to interpret and still remain largely enigmatic. The distinction between benevolent and malevolent is subjective, as we often interpret actions based on our human understanding of morality. However, many interactions with these entities instigated a sense of fear, distress, or even physical harm to our subjects. We categorized these as negative experiences, although I must confess we could not conclusively determine if they were inadvertently harmful or intentionally aggressive. Our interactions were limited, observational, and directed towards understanding rather than exchange. And remember, all of this is always followed under the heavy shadow of uncertainty.
Wow, that's admittedly kind of bleak and disheartening for someone who grew up with Star Trek. The idea that even the barest shred of commonality can't be shared is very sad to me. What general sense of the outcomes of these encounters did you get? Broadly negative, positive, or indifferent? Did any of these entities seem astonished or fearful of these attempts, or could nothing of the sort be determined? Was anyone killed as a result of the actions of any of these entities?
Most interactions, unfortunately, veered towards distressing. However, I'd hesitate to deem this as a definitive indication of aggression or malevolence. It's like two organisms from vastly different ecosystems encountering each other unexpectedly. The sense of fear and confusion can often lead to aggressive defense mechanisms, and the result could be negative. As to your question about their reactions, an explicit show of fear or astonishment is anthropomorphic thinking. We were interacting with entities from realms where conventional laws of reality seem to be flexible. Their forms, motivations, and means of expression thus may be radically different from ours. Sadly, there were reported cases where encounters resulted in fatalities, along with episodes of physical harm and psychological distress. However, the question of whether these were intentional attacks or dangerous side effects of the interaction remains in the realm of speculation.
Someone asked about alien governments. What about other human governments? Does China or another country have their own version of Sunland?
Some signs suggest that other countries have their own versions of Sunland and similar projects. After all, we live in an interconnected world. Countries keep a close eye on each other's technological and scientific advances. However, to my knowledge, specific information on foreign operations was never shared or passed around within my working division in Sunland. In reality, entities at this level of power and secrecy do a thorough job of maintaining the cloak of invisibility around them. Perhaps one day, a whistleblower from another corner of the world could shed more light on this.
Why are they not classified as universes?
In conventional understanding, a universe is all of space and time and its contents, which include planets, stars, galaxies, and all other forms of matter and energy. Whereas a dimension is more about the positional aspect, if you will, the coordinates that specify the point's location. What we deal with aren't universes in their entirety, but rather cross slices of different realities, which we term as dimensions. We could be looking at universes, but it's not wholly encompassing. It's like looking at a page in a book versus the entire book. The page belongs to the book, but it's not the book itself. Hence the term dimensions seems a more fitting terminology here. That is to say, it's Sunland's terminology, and it's stuck. But again, this is a very gray area that even I might not fully comprehend.
Would they say that the observable universe is a dimension?
In a way, yes. Our observable universe could be considered a dimension unto itself under Sunland's terminology and understanding. It's a stretch of reality with its own set of rules, known entities, and physical laws. But bear in mind, our terminologies on dimensions deviate wildly from the traditional scientific understanding. This is uncharted territory, and we haven't even comprehended the entirety of our own dimension, let alone the others.
Interesting. What about heat transfer? Does it deviate between dimensions?
Heat transfer is a complex topic when it comes to cross-dimensional physics. We notice that heat does not always transfer as expected in these other dimensions. It can vary wildly, and not always abide by our known laws of thermodynamics. Unpredictable behavior of heat was one of the biggest challenges we faced while studying and interacting with these dimensions. Particularly during experiments, we found certain materials that remained cool in extreme thermal environments, something that defies our current understanding of heat conduction. I wish I could provide a more straightforward answer, but the truth is, we're dealing with realities that don't adhere to our established understanding of physical principles. However, it's the same conundrum that makes the study of these dimensions riveting, albeit exceedingly challenging.
Maybe the heat transfer is merely flipped in those dimensions.
It's conceivable that such an aberration could be the result of a fundamental inversion or alteration in the principles of physics within those dimensions. However, if that's the case, we would expect to see some uniform rules even within their own framework of physicality. Yet the phenomena we observed didn't always follow consistent patterns, making it challenging to establish solid hypotheses or postulates. In essence, the behavior of heat and various other fundamental laws as we know it, without consistent rules, suggests that these realms might operate on principles wholly different from ours, or perhaps on a randomness that we struggle to comprehend with our finite understanding of order and chaos. Thank you all for spending this time with me, raising questions and inspiring deeper thought. I must take my leave now, and it's safer for me to avoid staying online for extended periods. Please understand that due to the precariousness of my situation, it may be a while before you hear from me again. But I assure you, as long as the thread is still up when the sun's first light cracks the sky open, I'll be back to continue answering your questions to the best of my abilities. Always remember the truth is out there, often veiled but never entirely out of reach. Good night.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.